If you'll find your seats, we're in Daniel chapter 6. It's been a couple weeks since we studied Daniel, and 3 weeks since I studied it with you. So thank you to Mark for covering for me 2 weeks ago when I was on vacation. And then we enjoyed a wonderful week with Eric last week. And so we did not get to study Daniel last Sunday morning. But it's good to be back, and it's good to get back into the study. I think there's so much that is here, and enjoyed what Mark was able to cover while I was out. Daniel chapter 6 will be primarily picking up in verse 14 in just a moment. Before we do, we'll start with a word of prayer. So if you'll take a moment, we'll go to God in prayer. Our wonderful and awesome Father in heaven, thank you for this time we have together to go to your word and to read of the life of Daniel and the work that he did on your behalf. And especially to see you put your plan together before we were even known to this world. That in so many generations ahead of time, you were making ways to prove that you had a plan for salvation through your Son. Help us to see you and your wisdom and your nature in Daniel, and to also see us, to see the plan come about and be worked through Daniel. Help us to be faithful stewards of the word, that we would grow in our knowledge, in our understanding, and in our appreciation of who you are. And this we pray in your Son, our Savior's name. Amen. All right, Daniel chapter 6. So as you'll recall from last time, the high officials, the satraps and the prefects and all of these high officials had come, and as Mark made sure we saw this language in verse 6, that they came by agreement to the king. They were running together with tumult, as is one way that it's talked about. The way I would say that is they were conspiring. Right? They were conspiring to go against Daniel. So they go before the king and petition for the king to make an edict and to make a rule that if anyone should go and petition any god or man except for the king for 30 days, they would be thrown in the lion's den. That was the Mede and Persian version of the cross. That was the most vile death that you could have, and it was not one that you would want to be a part of. And so he's showing this scene that they're coming and trying to catch Daniel and get rid of Daniel, because Daniel's the outsider and causing problems for them. They want the glory. They don't want Daniel to have it. And then verses 10 through 13, we see that Daniel, knowing that the law had passed, decides not to change his ways and goes right back to praying to God 3 times a day. He ignores the law and says, I'm doing what I've always done. I'm going to worship my God. I'm going to pray to my God. And I like the language that he uses in verse 10, where he says he got down on his knees, which is a position of worship. It's a bowing before God. And he prayed and gave thanks before his God. This is a man who is deciding, while being captive to a foreign nation and being oppressed by that nation's people, and he knows what they're trying to do to stop him to worship, he still goes to God and says, thank you. Thank you. I would imagine for being the God that you are and giving me the confidence that this doesn't matter. But I think that's important to remember as we go through this text. Daniel remains thankful while all these trials are going on. All right, with that being said, I'll have more to kind of tie back into this section, but let's read verses 14 and 15 and get a moment to reflect on those verses, and then we'll talk about it. So, then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. All right? So take just a moment, reflect on that, maybe answer in your mind. If you weren't here, go back and read the previous section to determine what words had the king just heard. And then we'll talk about it. All right, Daniel chapter 6, verses 14 and 15. What do you notice, or what questions do you have about the text there? Also, do you have the microphone, Tom? Cool. Comments? Scott?
I was thinking about how cool it is to see that just by serving God and being a man of God has given him such a good standing in the king's eyes.
Right.
And having, I guess, witnessing God through a man, I think is what it, because we get to see Daniel does show God's power in his serving too, right?
Absolutely.
So it's just neat to see that our life can be in a way that it will bring favor with those that are around us just by doing what God says. Not to seek the favor. It just happens. I feel like this is just I don't feel like Daniel really went to get himself exalted.
No, right, right.
God did that. And so it's just neat to see, because the king labors till the sun goes down to rescue him. And he has, he set his mind to deliver him. As soon as he hears, oh no, Daniel's caught up in this stupid decree that I made.
Right.
And now he's wishing he hadn't, I'm sure. And he's seeking a way. And he really works to save Daniel, not just, oh, bummer.
Yeah. And part of the struggle that Darius, the king, is going through, this might not be caught here if you weren't with us the last time we studied. Mark was good to point out how important the law was in this culture. In America, we can change a law if we do enough petitioning and want to do it, or we see the need for it. With the Medes and the Persians, they had a term called lex rex. L-E-X-R-E-X. Lex rex. The law is king. No one can change the law once it's written. And so Darius had been tricked, right? We saw these people coming in agreement, and they were trying to catch Daniel. And so they had him put this law into effect for 30 days. That if you bow to any other god or man, you had to go into lion's den. And now here's Darius seeing this man of God that he respects because of the way Daniel conducts himself. It was pointed out last time, Daniel's over 1/3 of the kingdom of the Medes and Persians at this point. And Darius is going, how do I save him? He's too valuable to me. But I can't change the law because the law is king. So now he's up all night and he's exhausted. And we're going to read more language on that. But he's trying to figure out, how do I save him without breaking the law? Because if even the king breaks the law, the king faces the penalty. Okay? So that's the turmoil he's in. Michi and then Mark.
Yeah, I had noticed that too, because it seems like Darius was drawn to Daniel's spirit, but all the people around him were feeding into the king's ego. And it seems like now, like you were saying, the king now has to bear the burdens of what his team had told him to do.
Right.
And they're like, you're the king, live forever, like you should do this. And now his whole team is like, no, we're not going to take responsibility for this. We're the ones who told you to, but we're going to put it on the king's hand.
Right.
So now not only was Daniel set up for failure, but also the king was set up too.
Right. And what I found interesting, you asked a question last time it was studied, why did they make it for just 30 days? I think part of it is because the law itself mandated they couldn't go after their gods. They couldn't go after other advice. They all had to go to the king and only the king. And that's crippling to a nation. And so part of the 30 days was this law is short, serving a particular purpose, and then it'll be gone. And we'll go back to living the way we did as the Medes and Persians, and Daniel will be out of the way, and we'll go back to worshiping our gods. We'll go back to praising our king, having our power with the king. So I think some of that short-term nature there was because they knew it would cause problems in the long run. I mean, it was such a bad law. So, Mark?
Yeah, just going along with what everybody else is already saying, the more you read this, the more you realize this is a terrible idea. This is a conspiracy not against Daniel only. This is a conspiracy against the king. As we read, we see how much he really appreciates having Daniel around.
Absolutely.
And now the accusation has to be against the king. You can't not kill him, is what they're saying.
Absolutely. And back to Michi's point as well, like tying that in, is you have this king who's beside himself valuing this man, but because he just blindly took the counsel of those who were supposed to advise him, the section before what we just read, you see how manipulated Darius feels. Because he didn't understand the implications of this law. And so these people come to him and say, first and foremost, didn't you sign that law into action? Darius at that point has no proper response but to say what he says in verse 12, the thing stands fast. Yeah, I can't change it, you can't change it, it's there. That's what we're dealing under. You're correct. I did the thing. And then they go, well, then let us tell you about your favorite person, Daniel, and how you now have to act against him. And so Darius was put to the test there. And this is him wrestling with that, much distressed, labored till the sun went down. Paul.
Thank you. So there's, just to take a couple steps back, I believe that this theme is riddled throughout Scripture.
Sure.
This idea of someone knowing the right thing to do, but not doing it. We see this with Jesus, and there's an argument to be made about Potiphar as well. And those stand out. I mean, this is something that's just so heavily inflated. This is Jesus. This theme is huge. And it's important to see that those connections that even God's people will suffer in this manner. That
Sure.
there is this right way to go, yet still persecution.
Right. Yeah, and you see Darius struggle with what we will struggle with sometimes. Knowing the right thing to do, but also having a law or an edict or a cultural norm or pressure from friends or family or advisors to do something different. How do you balance that? Right? In this case, the law was clear. If he does break the law, he dies. He faces the punishment. And so that's that weight of what decision do I make when I know there's something right to do, but it's against the law or against our culture. Dave has something to say for us.
Well, the contrast for me is Daniel judged the following this law from the king or the real king, God.
Sure.
So that is a no-brainer for him.
Sure.
He's going to follow God, whatever the consequences. That's a stark lesson for us.
Good.
We obey our God in heaven, not all these people in the world teaching this and that and the other thing. And it's pretty profound if you ask me. You know how hard that would be under duress like that. I appreciate that he did that.
Right.
He stood up.
Well, and I think that highlights that. I'm glad you said that, because it highlights that we have Daniel and Darius being pressed against with the same law, with the same expectations, with the same culture, with the same access to God. And Darius is holding the worldly law up because he knows the weight of that. Daniel is all in on God, right? He is full force. I'm not giving up no matter what the law says. Go ahead, Aaron.
These conspirators reveal their true character and motive, and they are not interested in what's best for the kingdom,
Right.
or the king. They're interested in their own power, and they're very selfish in their motives. I don't even know how this could turn out well for them, even if their plan succeeds.
Right.
Because they've put the king into a corner, clearly against his wishes.
Right.
And it just seems very short-sighted.
Yeah. Well, and it's at this point that we get confirmation how twisted they are. Because it's the third time that we see that phrase that they came by agreement. We see it first in verse 6, then again in verse 11, and now again in verse 15. So we get a tripling of the fact that these men are conspiring and they don't care about the impact. All they care about is destroying one person. Does that sound familiar to the New Testament? When Christ is on earth, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all these leaders that should have been leading the kingdom properly, and they can't help but focus on just destroying the one, and they don't care about any impact. And that's what will happen if we get fixated on anything or anyone other than God. That's part of the lesson this is proving to us. Dave, and then we'll move on in the text.
You know, I can't help it. Compare that with our country and what's going on today. It's the same thing. They don't care about anything except themselves. And
Sure.
so, you know, what Aaron said is correct. It's just that, wow. The reason they don't is because they don't know him.
Right.
And they're not willing to listen about him. You know,
Yeah.
and it's something to learn. I mean,
Absolutely. So here we have the king struggling. How can I avoid putting Daniel in the lion's den? And he's struggling till sundown. And so verse 16 then picks up. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God whom you serve continually deliver you." And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went into his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. All right, take about a minute, and then we'll talk about that. Okay, what do you notice or what questions do you have? Aaron was quick, and then Michi.
Well, the law is greater than the king, and the king's prayer is that Daniel's God, it would be greater than the law,
Yeah.
and do what he couldn't.
Okay, good.
Save him.
Yeah, absolutely. What else is happening in that prayer as a result? Anyone? It doesn't have to be Aaron. I don't know your name. What's your name? Elizabeth. Thanks for being with us. What do you got? We'll get that microphone if you don't mind so we can all hear you.
It means that he's also technically going against the law because he's praying to God that he'll save his friend.
Yeah. Isn't Darius going against the law in that moment? He's petitioning another god. He's petitioning someone other than himself. How do the satraps feel about that? Oh, I'm good. You can do that. That's fine. As long as Daniel's dead, I'm good. Right? And so you have that moment. Thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely. It's both him, the king, recognizing, I need God to take control of this situation. It's out of my hands. But it's also a unique way that he's going against the law. Michi and then Barry had a thought.
Just to go along with that, it's just the power of prayer.
Yeah.
That in that moment, Darius pretty much gave up his gods just for that moment and said, I want your God to save you.
Yeah.
And he fasted and he did the things that like we would want people to do as Christians, as someone who follows God. And for that moment, he kind of did. Even if outwardly he still served, like he still was very much praying for Daniel. And that power of prayer really is super strong.
Absolutely.
And it's cool to see here.
Absolutely, yeah, and the fact that he's laid it all before him, and then he's doing the fasting like you talked about. Now there's some who are, you could say that it was just he was so distraught, he didn't know what was going to happen, that he's sleepless. It says he's so restless he can't sleep. The people around him know, don't go bother the king. He's not in a good mood, and now he's also hangry, right? So you've got this idea that he's fasting. Is it because he's petitioning to God, or is it because he's so distraught that he can't even think to eat? I mean, it is nighttime. I don't eat at night while I'm sleeping. But if I am up and I'm wrestling with something, at some point in the night I go, I need food so I can make it through the night. That doesn't even cross his mind. He's so worried about Daniel. Barry.
Well, having people executed was not a rare thing. But having the person be so well thought of by the king that the king is distraught about it is rare.
Absolutely.
And so he really cares about Daniel. So even so much that he runs down there, and before he even gets to the thing, he's yelling out, Daniel, Daniel.
Yeah.
Are you all right? You know.
Right.
And so this is different than your average execution, and the king saying, yeah, execute him, and not caring about.
No, he knows how impactful this is to him and his kingdom. It also reflects on Darius that he put this revolter into a power position, and now he's being executed. I mean, there's just so much packed into this, so many implications of these decisions, and he's beside himself. We got Mark over there.
I can't help but come to the conclusion that he has an affection for Daniel. I think he loves Daniel in this instance. There's no reason for him to not think there's somebody else who I can replace him with.
Right.
Because there's lots of people. That's what they're trying to do, is take his place and remove the influence of this God that he says is the only God.
Absolutely.
This is in the middle of these God wars. Belshazzar brought in this other god, the sin god, and now there's this Marduk god who's the god again.
Right.
And here's this outlier who's telling them all, none of those gods are gods at all. I don't know how this is happening with him, but I see faith growing in this fellow.
Absolutely.
He's saying, "Your God. I hope your God can do this." There's a kernel of faith there.
And I think that's based on what Scott was saying. He's had such a unique character about him, Daniel has, that, I mean, through all of what he went through with Nebuchadnezzar, and the trials he went through, and the proofs that he gave to Nebuchadnezzar about his faith, And then that carries through because the people are part of that new culture when the Medes and Persians take over, and word gets to the king, and he lifts Daniel up. And you're right, he has such a great care and concern for Daniel. And he's starting to recognize you have something unique. And you serve a God that I don't quite understand, but I understand he's powerful, and I'm going to call on him. Lisa, and then we'll look at something else here in the text.
What he understands is that Daniel, the trust he has in Daniel is not even a question. And whatever it is that makes Daniel who he is so that he can be so ultimately trusted.
Yeah.
I mean, how Darius obviously doesn't have anyone else in his kingdom who he can rely on like he can rely on Daniel. And it's God through Daniel that is what he's really relying on.
Right. And he especially can't rely on anyone because his most trusted advisors just forced him to kill the guy that he was most enjoying having in his advisor roles and in his court. And so, yeah, even more so. He can't trust anyone now. And Daniel's the only one I could go to. Aaron.
Yeah, and this should have been a tomb for Daniel.
Good.
And a stone was rolled over the
That's what I wanted to go to
mouth
next, so,
the mouth of it, and then he ended up walking out.
Right. And that imagery is important. Ida is going to comment on that. I'll let her go first before I say anything. I usually end up stepping on her comment, so.
Yes. I was just going to say that also the next day when people came to the tomb or to the den, how did they feel when they found out that the one they thought was dead wasn't?
Sure, and we'll get there and really consider that in the next section. But I want to go back to Aaron's comment because that phrasing, and then Michi's going to have a comment. That phrasing that a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den is almost verbatim to exactly the statements made, certainly in Mark chapter 15 and verse 46, and Matthew chapter 27, verses 59 through 60, that when Jesus was laid in the tomb, a stone was rolled over the entrance. And I think that's the importance that you were implying, but I want us to be very clear. Daniel becomes an image of what would come through Christ. Those messages are also repeated in a longer form, Luke chapter 23, verse 50 through 24, verse 3, John chapter 19 through the beginning of chapter 20. They all mention that stone being either rolled onto the tomb or rolled away from. Okay? That's such an important image, and that's here in Daniel's because it's supposed to be a tomb for him. It's supposed to be his death. How do you go into a pit with hungry lions and not die? And that's what Jesus does. He goes to the death, to the grave, and then he comes out resurrected, as we'll see Daniel does as well. Michi.
I have a question.
Okay. I hope someone has an answer.
Is this kind of similar, almost in parallel to when Peter denied Jesus, like knew that Jesus was dope, right? Knew he didn't want the things but denied him, where Darius is kind of like, I don't want to hurt this person, but he did it anyway. Peter still denied Jesus and still hoped for it, and like Peter still went out and preached and stuff. Is there a parallel here, or am I making things up like I normally do?
You're probably making things up. No, I think there's... I can kind of see what you're going with. I think a big distinction for me between those two is Peter confessed a faith in God, in Jesus. And he said, I will stand by you no matter what. There's no way I'm denying you. And then when the pressure came, and it wasn't even that he would die necessarily, maybe he would have, but when that pressure came, he denied that Jesus was who he was, or that he had known him. Whereas Darius, I think to Mark's point, is still learning who this God is. He's still trying to figure out who this is. And so he's not, and he's in a weird position again. He's got to balance the law. He's got to balance his desire to save Daniel. And so he's not quite where Peter was. But I see some similarities. So I'm not saying we can't look at those two in parallel. And I saw like 5 hands shoot up. So either I'm wrong or that triggered some thought. Right behind you first, there.
Another thing is how Peter denied Christ 3 times, whereas Daniel would pray to God 3 times a day.
Mm. Yeah, and the satraps tried to subvert Daniel with that statement. They came in agreement 3 times. We see a lot of 3 in this narrative. Very good. Aaron, Leto, I think Scott. No, he said no. Okay, Aaron and Leto.
You might be able to make some parallels between Darius and Pontius Pilate,
Oh, there you go.
who had the ability to not move forward
Good.
with Jesus' crucifixion.
There you go.
And I don't
And
know
saw
how
the reality that there was
Yeah.
no sin in him. Yeah.
I don't know how Darius could have. Maybe he should have went to the lion's den, and not sent Daniel, and maybe he should have been in there with him
Right?
if he had more. If he would have done the right thing,
Yeah, absolutely.
and they both would have been saved.
Yeah, I like the parallel to Pontius Pilate better than to Peter. But I think they're all wrestling with, how do I balance my life and the expectations of law, and how do I, live recognizing that this God is unique? Leto.
Yeah, I think I was going along with Aaron regarding Pontius Pilate. And at the time of Christ, this is a similarity between this scenario of Daniel and the scenario of Pontius Pilate. And you mentioned a while ago the pressure which is going on with Darius and the pressure that was going on with Pontius Pilate.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
anyway, God's purpose was done, or was kind of gave way to the truth and to what is going on.
And that highlights a point that we're seeing not only in this story, because again, this parallels chapter 3, right? That God will always work his way and his will through every situation. If he needed Daniel, he'll make sure Daniel survives. He needs Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to survive. He's going to make sure they survive no matter what comes against them, right? And so here we have that, and even to the point that he can save Daniel without having to break the seal. Darius, we could talk about this, but Darius put the seal of his and the satraps, his leaders, his lords. Why? To make sure the king wouldn't come behind and break the seal, rescue Daniel, put the stone back, reseal it himself. Maybe he did that because he knew he would be tempted to. Maybe that was tradition. Maybe that was the expectation. But it is there. There is no way without both parties who are on opposite sides of the fence that any one of them can subvert this plan. It is in God's hands entirely, as Darius has pointed out. Okay, let's see what we can get through in the last 10 minutes that we have together this morning as we go into seeing the next day, as we've referred to. Beginning in verse 19. Then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him and also before you. O king, I have done no harm." Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. All right, take a minute, and then we'll talk about it. See what questions and observations you can find. All right. What observations or questions do you have? What stands out to you? Tom, you had one, and then Steve as well. So,
in verse 24, what happens to the families of those who accuse Daniel is pretty brutal. But it's, I think, a lesson for us that our sins don't just affect us, that they do have consequences to those around us, the ones that we love and the ones that we care for.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see here that not only is it that it affects them, but you see Darius acting in a way to make sure that, because really he needed to take care of the ones that had been bad advice. But what happens if you only take care of that? The children raise up and they want to seek vengeance, and that was the problem with the Israelites. God would send them in to conquer a nation, and what would they do? They would leave a small gathering of people who could rise back up and cause problems later. And so when sin is not addressed completely, to your point, Tom, when it's not addressed completely in our lives, it will continue to have impacts on those around us. And it also stands in contrast, this verse 24, the anguish Darius had over putting Daniel to death, and then going back into the mindset of the normal king mindset of just put him to death. He's not in anguish over those that he threw into the lion's den, the men, their children, and their wives. He seems to not really care at that point because he's cleaning out the problem. Steve.
Yeah, and the law obviously stopped on the next day, at the break of day. But when first reading it, it just sounds like he's going into the lion's den. It's just going to be stayed in there until he's eaten or whatever. But I guess the law stopped the next day.
Well, I think more what we're seeing here is, because we don't have an exact timeline on how much has advanced, where Daniel, how many days have gone since the law went into effect. What we are seeing here, though, is that expectation that you go into the lion's den, you just have to stay there one night and you're dead. And so the king's going back out and going, okay, it should be done. Let me check, because I've been struggling with this all night. And Daniel's not dead. So I don't know that the law's done necessarily. It might be timed with it. We don't have an exact timeline on it. But hands. I love it. Michi, Ida, Lisa, and then we'll work our way back around if we got time in 5 minutes.
So I like in 22, he said, my God sent his angel, and I was found innocent before him and toward you. So he first and foremost said, he didn't say, oh, since they didn't eat me, that means I'm innocent. He said, no, God said that I'm innocent towards him and was saved, and also towards you. That's why I was found without fault,
right?
Which is cool.
It's absolutely cool. And there is that, the idea there that he had the confidence, and it's confirming what Darius had known too. Daniel's not at fault here. Why am I having to put him to death? Why am I having to give my most trusted advisor to the lions? I don't want that to happen. Ida.
I hope this comes out right. Yeah, thank you.
Very, we do too.
I wanted to comment on the same phrase where he said, I was found blameless before him.
Yeah.
And we had quite a discussion a few weeks ago in Thessalonians about being found blameless.
Yeah.
And I think what Michi said, that God found him blameless. Why are we worrying about being blameless? We want God to find us blameless, because that means a lot more than just thinking that we're blameless.
Yeah. And that's maybe some of the additional comfort in the fulfillment of that thanksgiving that Daniel was giving earlier in the chapter. And how beautiful is it that while he's in exile and the whole people of Israel are feeling like God doesn't see us anymore, he's not caring for us, that Daniel is still able to see this glimpse that God has found me blameless. And there's a restoration of that relationship. There's a strengthening of that relationship for Daniel and for us when we truly recognize that we've been found blameless in Christ. Lisa.
Like Ida, I hope this also sounds okay when it comes out.
Y'all always do fine. I don't know why you're doubting
So,
yourselves.
these people were treacherous, not just to Daniel, but to the king.
Yeah.
They were basically treasonous.
Yeah.
And what happened with them, they could never claim that the lions weren't hungry,
Right.
that God didn't close the mouth of the lions. They could never prove that.
They hadn't eaten all night. Yeah. And so you have that proof. Daniel survived the night. Mark is behind you there. And that becomes the proof that they would have been hungry. There would have been no reason. They should have eaten Daniel because they were ready to eat the next meal, right? Mark.
Yeah, it is interesting about the law, whether it went away or whatever, but I think we're seeing here that God is showing that he's greater than anything they could come up with. And this is something that Adriana and Kristen were talking about weeks ago. They were talking about how God's law is righteous. This is more important than anything.
Absolutely.
But again, the big thing that I see is the beginning of this, where he's coming in haste. It means he's trembling. That word means he's trembling at this. He is so concerned. And then this lamentable cry. He cries out, "Are you okay?" It is very moving to read this to me.
It is very moving. And you can imagine the hope and the desire he has to just hear one word. That's all he would need. And what does he get? "O King, live forever," is how Daniel starts out. How calming and reassuring would that be for Darius in that moment? I'm going to try again. Is it Elizabeth?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Good.
A little bit before that, he mentioned that has your God saved you? So while he believes of it in the other God, he still says like, "Oh, your God." But he still believes that he's able to help him.
Yeah, and we saw this back in chapter 2 and in chapter 3, where Nebuchadnezzar is wrestling with that idea, where he's still coming to his understanding of who God is, and he says, yeah, as long as you don't say anything against this guy's God, right? He's not fully convinced, but he's starting to believe, and here Darius is doing the same thing. He's recognizing, but he hasn't fully made a relationship and a connection to God. Dave.
One of the things I too want this to come out correctly.
Right.
What sticks in my craw is these guys, these satraps, acted on their own desires and impulses.
Absolutely.
Did not regard their families, their wives and children, for the obvious reasons for salvation of their generation. Let's bring this to modern times. Our actions affect our families.
Absolutely.
We may not be thrown in a lion's den or anything like that, but the point I'm trying to make is we need to, as good husbands, be mindful of our actions and what we do and do not do in regards to including our family.
Absolutely.
Now, the thing that's disturbing mostly is they did not do that, and you thought, well, they'll just be the ones punished. It's a like you said, it's a sign to everyone that you don't mess around with the truth. And God did that, not Darius.
Right.
So, what do you think about that when God will punish you and your family? And it may not be by death, but it is possible that your actions, they will suffer actions because of your stupidity and the things that you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you need to be careful.
All actions will be judged in the end.
Yeah, you got to be careful of that.
Yeah, I see more hands. I would love to continue the conversation. It'll have to wait till next week, but I will leave you with this. Notice how that result ends. It doesn't actually say that these men, the children, and the women die. It says before they hit the ground, their bones were broken. How much torment would that cause to have that happen? And the text leaves you going, I'm assuming they die. I mean, that would be certain death. But the lions don't just kill them instantly. It's breaking every bone. And that's the anguish that you're left with, realizing the result of these malicious and evil people being fixed on one thing, one person, and not caring about the consequences. All right, leave you with that. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll enter into our service and Lord's Supper and praise and songs and all that. So good to be with you.